Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to class. 1 second, I'll be right back. Okay. Well, hope you guys are doing good. Have a great Thanksgiving holiday. Here we are back at it for the last few weeks of our fall semester, and just going to get you guys started in a couple minutes once it hits 9, so about 2 minutes from now. For now, though, just feel free to get comfortable and hey, Eva, and if you want to say hi or anything, it's always nice. Good to see you guys. Good morning, guys. Hi, Drew. Hi, Kelly. Sorry, I just had to grab a different notebook out of my bag. Hi there, guys. Hi, Senna. Okay, almost ready to go. Okay, everybody. Well, welcome back. Thanks again so much for your attendance and all of your hard work through a challenging semester, for everybody and I guess for the country and the world with the pandemic and everything else. But you guys are very tough and you're sticking with it, and I'm very proud of you guys for doing that. But anyways, welcome back. So we have 2 more weeks of class before we get set for the final. As you guys know, this Friday is the due date of the second essay. So hopefully you've had some time to at least start collecting your thoughts on it, if not writing towards an initial draft. Anybody who's interested in getting any kind of comment or feedback from me, it's always up to you. If you want to send me something, if it came in with enough time, I might be able to take a look at it. But after Wednesday or so, it's pretty late in the game. It'll be hard for me to take a look at new drafts at that point, just with the other duties that I have, but I'll try my best. So just reminding you, Friday will be the due date of that coming paper. And then aside from that, we just have 3 lectures this week. Actually, there's 4 lectures to follow. So there's 3 this week and 1 on Monday, and then we just have 2 review sessions next week to get us prepared for the final. I'll distribute the study guide for the final exam later on in this week so that you'll have some time to get prepared for the review sessions. And that's basically the plan. So your paper's due Friday. Next week, we'll have a couple review sessions, and you'll by then have the study guide for the final. And then we will just conduct a couple of review sessions and hold the final exam at the scheduled time that you see there listed in the syllabus. Okay, so if there's ever any questions about those matters or anything else in the class, just feel free to ask me either here or by email or whatever the case may be. Okay, so if that's all well and good then, and again, hope you guys had a nice, happy holiday, let's get started back onto our next topic in the class. So we're down to the last subject of the semester, and just a quick look back, we started with philosophy of religion, Then we moved into the subject of ethics for a little while. Then we considered epistemology for a few weeks. Then it was the metaphysics of time, as you may remember. And then just now we've concluded with the philosophy of mind and the debate between physicalism and dualism. Now we have one more subject, and that is the subject of life and death. So what makes a life good? Is there any kind of formula or blueprint for living a good human life? That's kind of the main question. And you might be interested to know that there have been a different variety of arguments on this topic over the centuries and over the millennia, really, by philosophers. So there are different perspectives, essentially, different arguments considering what would make a human life go well. So we're going to look at a few different positions on that. The first one we're going to read about is taking us back to ancient Greece again and the writings of Plato and his teacher, Socrates. So there's an ancient Greek Platonic account of what makes a human life go best. And so we're going to study that today. And then after that, we have a couple of different approaches that are a little more modern. There's Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher of the 20th century. And so we're going to look at his perspective, which is very much different from the Greek account. And then we will try and also look at the work of Derek Parfit. And then on the topic of death, the question could be asked, is death a bad thing? Since death is one of the most personal and difficult things about being alive. Is it something to dread? Is it something to fear, or is it not? And we will also consider that question at the very end. So we've reached the end, and it's on life and death. But now we'll just move on and start talking about the first author here. So this is going to be from Plato. And Plato lived a long time ago, 428 to 347 BC. We've talked about his life a little bit prior to this in the class. I mean, I told you that he's the student of Socrates, and I mentioned that, Socrates lived and died back then, and that he had a trial where he was basically persecuted for so-called corrupting the youth. Well, anyway, the torchbearer of Greek thought was passed on to Plato, and Plato wrote a series of different books and essays, which are often called Plato's dialogues. In these dialogues, we hear the main character, Socrates, usually speaking and offering insight onto whatever the subject is. The most classic and famous work of Plato is called Plato's Republic, and we're actually reading a section from Plato's Republic today. So it's called The Republic. And so in the Republic, Plato gives a perspective on what would make an ideal human society. So it's kind of like a vision of a utopian society, like an ideal perfected society. He says, here's what would have to happen. Here's the structure that would have to be in place for a human society, a civilization, to be in the highest flourishing condition that it could be in. So the Republic is his word for this kind of idealized, perfected society. And the whole book is an argument as to how that society would be structured, how it would work, and how it would function. Along the way of providing this account of the ideal human society, Plato also gives insight into what he thinks would be the ideal human life for one individual. And he actually says that there are close similarities between the ideal civilization or society, the Republic, and then the ideal individual human life. Because he thinks that an individual human life is kind of almost a microcosm of the society at large. So I will have to talk to you about his picture of the ideal society, and then that'll build kind of a bridge to his, model of the best human life that you could possibly live. Okay, so life and death. I mean, it's simply true that one of the most difficult questions that we face as human beings is how should we live our lives? What would be the right way to live? Is there even an answer to this? And how we ought to confront the concept of death. Over the millennia, philosophers have critically approached this topic, and so by reading their ideas, maybe it will inform our own perspective a little bit, or at least open our mind to other perspectives. So the first selection today comes from the ancient Greek Plato. And I'm telling you that it's from the Republic, this section that we're reading. But in our book, as often has been the case with our book, they've extracted a small piece from this larger work and given it a retitled title. So the title given in the book for the section we're reading, the excerpt, is on the harmony of the soul. On the harmony of the soul. It's given this new title for the book because we're going to learn about how he thinks that to have the best human life, you need to get your soul in the proper sort of balance and, as he puts it, harmony. So let's get into it and see what the whole idea is. Okay, so in this dialogue, the two characters that are talking are Socrates and Plato's older brother, whose name is Glaucon. So it's Socrates and Glaucon just having a conversation about life, about society, and what would be the best form of human society and individual life. So let's learn about the Republic. The Republic has a certain kind of structure. Okay, so in Plato's Republic, the ideal human society as he, envisions it, the society would be divided into three parts. So people basically would find themselves in one of three possible positions in the society. So here are the three main parts of the Republic. Okay, so one group are the merchants. Okay, now their task in society is basically, that's like the equivalent of people that work a trade or a craft, business owners, people who own and operate businesses and basically sell goods and services for profit. So these are people who, again, sell goods, sell services, and do that for a profit. Sell or trade goods and services for a profit. So that's the merchant class of the society. And he says that's the largest class. That's where most of the people in the Republic are. So most people just work a job or tend to some type of profit-making venture, either as an employee of a company or as one of the owners of it. And their job for the society is to produce these goods and services for everybody to use. Another part of the society, a second part, is different from the merchants, and that's what he calls the warriors. Okay, so the warriors have a whole different function and role in the society. The warriors, this is his word, but it's basically the equivalent of like our, you could say, police and military, the defense services of the state, those that are tasked with the duty to provide security, to provide for security against external threats like invasion from a foreign nation or whatever, or against internal instability. So if there was like, I don't know, the need for deployment of National Guard or some type of forceful ordering to a chaotic scenario in the domestic society, then that would also be the task of these warriors to quell insurrection or to restore peace. So anyway, that's their job. So they have to defend and protect the Republic from both external threats and internal instability. Okay, so warriors, again, it's something that you can compare with the idea of police forces and military members. Okay, and then there's one more group, and this is really the most important group of all. That is what they call the kings. Okay, so the kings in the Republic are basically like the political leadership class. This is the heads of state, the equivalent of like, presidents, prime ministers, kings, like monarchs, or if we are talking about a representative body like congressional leaders and stuff, then those are also in the same realm. So kings are those who institute the policies and affect the rules of the society as a whole. So they're the leaders, they run the society, basically they're the head of the show. And so create policy and oversee the Republic. So they also, the kings, have the authority to order the warriors into service for whatever the purposes may be. They set the policy, and they also bear control over the military and the warrior class. All right, so we got these three main parts of the Republic, and according to Plato's idea, every member of society would be placed in one of these different categories depending on their actual abilities and skills. That's one thing that's a little different between Plato's Republic and our modern day, liberal democracies that we are living in, like right now. For example, in our society, if you're a person who wants to basically take your life in any different direction, you're free to do that. And we don't say, well, you can only do the thing that you're best at, basically. Like oftentimes people choose the things that are most in line with their talents and capabilities. But for example, in our society, you could be like the biggest, strongest person who's really would be a very capable fighting soldier. But if you just want to open a business and sell, vacuum cleaners or something, you're free to do that. And vice versa. You could be, the most intellectually gifted person who could really be a great, political leader. But in our society, if you want to be like a person that just joins the military, then you can focus on that instead. But in Plato's Republic, you didn't have that freedom to just move into whichever category of society that you wanted. You'd be placed there based on your actual ability, which they would test through a rigorous system of testing and evaluation. So the way the system would essentially work is that you'd go through your primary education, and you'd take on instruction in some basic subjects, mathematics, music, history, physical education and stuff like that. Then when you finished your primary education, kind of similar to finishing K through 12, you'd be given this big rigorous test that evaluates your knowledge and skills at that point. And so the outcome of this big test, it's kind of like an SAT, but much more is on the line even than that. The result of this test is going to determine whether you're going to move to another tier of society or not. So basically the people who failed and did not do so well on that big post-education exam, they would be placed in the warrior class. So the thought is that, well, if you really didn't have the best intellectual capacity, then the judgment of society is your best contribution to the Republic is going to be instead your physical ability to provide for its defense and security. So those that failed the first main test, or at least didn't surpass its standards, would go into the warrior group. But suppose you passed that test and you did well. Okay, so now you get to be appointed to a second course of even higher education. Okay, so now you're on to a second course of higher education. You continue, your studies are now a little more advanced. And at the end of that, you get a second big exam given to you. So the people now have taken 2 exams if they've gotten that far. And at that point, some will pass and some will fail yet again. So take the case of the people that didn't do so well on the second test. They passed the first one, but they stalled out after that and they didn't do as well on the second one. Then those would be the people placed into the merchant category. Okay, because the people that are merchants, they have some intellectual skills and abilities. They're able to own and operate businesses and, oversee their operation, but they're not the best and the brightest, the cream of the crop, the absolutely most intellectually gifted. So they're in the merchant class, thanks. But suppose that you passed that second test too, okay? So you did well on the first one, you also surpassed the second one. Now you're placed into an even higher third tier of education that continues well into your adult life, even into your middle age. And when that is completed, now you enter into the ranks of the kings. So basically, the system was set up this way according to Plato's intuition, because we didn't want to have people in the position of the king that didn't have the greatest intellectual capacity. So you basically have to prove it, and only people eligible to be kings would be the wisest few. In fact, he was fond of using the phrase philosopher kings in his writing, because he basically thought that would be the characteristic of the people who reached that level. They would be wise people. They would be like, how philosophers are, I guess, if that's a fair description. People who are thoughtful, weigh arguments carefully, make precise judgments based on facts. So that was the kind of person who he thought could only serve well as the king. And that's why they had to weed people out by means of this very extended process of appointment to the position based on evaluation and testing. So you see, it's not a democracy. That's actually a big difference from our system. In our system, how does a person become an elected leader? Well, they win an election, right? But Plato was famously hostile and skeptical to the concept of democracy. He actually did say that Democracy leads to tyranny of the majority, and over time you can have a person appeal to a block of voters and win a majority share of votes, but yet be a corrupt individual who's going to turn into a tyrant and stuff like that. So he thought there's no check against this kind of corruption in a democracy because it's just majority rules. And majority rules, in his view, can lead to a tyrannical outcome if you have a person that's capable of manipulating and exploiting a majority of the democracy. So in the Plato Republic, he said, we got to get off democracy. It's better to have this kind of enlightened despotism that is the result of his republic idea. In fact, yeah, he said that without the republic, society is bound to perpetually cycle through three non-ideal forms of government. He said it would go from democracy to tyranny when a tyrant overthrew the democracy and captured its power. And then after a while, the tyrant would be brought down by powerful oligarchs, and then it would become an oligarchy. After a while, popular pressure on the oligarchs would cause them to return the power to the people and reinstitute democracy. And then this cycle would continue to perpetually revolve. Democracy, tyranny, oligarchy, and on and on and on through that cycle. But in his view, the republic, the ideal utopian society that he described, would be the only way to avoid the shortcomings of those other three forms of government. So anyway, that's how people got placed into the various categories of the society. Next, I need to tell you guys about the virtue that he claimed is specific to each of the three parts. Okay, so okay, so once again, we have these three parts of the republic: the merchants, warriors, and kings. So in the case of each of the three, Plato claims that there is a virtue that's distinctive of that part. So a note about the concept of virtue. Virtue in the usage of the ancient Greeks refers to a quality that a thing would have if it's able to perform its function excellently well. Okay, so I'll just write that here one time. Sorry, I just wanted to get a better marker. The quality that a thing has when it is able to perform its function excellently well. So just very well. Okay, so the term virtue, again, just as we can see it written there, is whatever quality or attribute that a thing would have if it was able to do its distinctive task or function excellently well. Now, I know that just looking at the definition, it may seem a bit obscure, but let me help you with a quick example. Okay, so take a kitchen knife that you would, prepare a meal with or whatever. What is the function of the knife? Who knows that? That's easy enough. The function, the task, the job that the knife is there to do is to what? You can tell me in the chat. It is to cut, yes, easy. It's to cut stuff, to cut food and whatever, vegetables, meat, whatever the case is. It's to cut. That's what a knife is for. So what would be the virtue of a knife? The quality that if a knife has this, quality, this attribute, then it's going to be a good knife that does its job well. So the virtue of a knife, the quality that makes it good at cutting stuff, is if it's a what? You, I think, will know this. What's the virtue that makes a knife an excellent knife? Yeah, sharpness. Good, Drew. So being sharp is a virtue of a knife, because if it's a sharp knife, it can cut well and cut easily. If it's a dull knife and it lacks sharpness, then it's not the best knife, right? The sharper knife is the better knife because it does its job better. Okay, so that's just one example. Now, we're going to apply that to the case of these three parts of the society, because Plato claims that each of them have a function and a role to play in the larger working of the republic. And so each one would have a virtue distinctive of it if it's functioning at its best, highest level. Okay, so now I'm going to list the virtue that is found within each of the three parts of the republic. So the virtue of the merchant class is, so let me, this is the part of society, and then below I'm writing the virtue. The virtue of the merchant class is what they call temperance. Temperance. And the word temperance basically just means having the ability to have moderation and self-control over your desires and over your appetites. Okay, so temperance, having moderation and self-control over your desires and appetites. So the merchants, what's their job in society? Their job is to produce goods and services that they then trade to make a profit off of. And for them to do that well and to do their task for the republic well, they have to have that bit of temperance, meaning that the merchant class should be able to make money and should be able to profit, but they shouldn't do so in a way that's excessively greedy or avaricious over wealth, right? Because if you are excessively greedy, then you're going to be a bad merchant. You're going to rip people off pretty much. You're going to sell things at an inflated rate, maybe deficient quality products to save on your overhead costs. You might not pay your employees very well. You might, after a while, start to try and influence the levers of government to tend towards your financial advantage, but to the detriment of the society as a whole. So basically, having too much greed and desire for wealth can make the merchant class corrupt and can undermine the wealth functioning of the society as a whole. So they should be able to make profit and to sell good products, but they'll only really do it if they don't have excessive greed. In other words, if they do have moderation and self-control over their desires and appetites. This would ensure that they don't become too greedy and therefore corrupt, fraudulent, etc. So we move now to the warriors. Their job for society is perhaps even easier to understand. It's to protect it, to defend it against threats, both external and internal. So if you're going to be a good warrior and you're going to be able to capably defend and protect the republic, then you would have to have the quality that is known as just bravery or courage, some call it. But we'll go with, let's go with brave or courage, sorry. So courage, the ability to face danger when it's appropriate or when it's necessary. So all right, so warriors that are going to have to go out and actually fight, maybe kill, to protect the health and stability of the society that their warriors form. If they don't have courage, if they're not willing and able to face danger, right? If they're cowardly, if they lack bravery, if they lack courage, then they would not be very good fighting soldiers or police officers, right? You don't want the soldier who is out there on the field to say, this is getting a little scary and I'm just too scared to do this, so I'm not going to be able to go out there and fight. That's going to be a soldier and a fighting force, if they exhibit this quality, that's going to be easily defeated and overtaken. So to be a good warrior, to be a capable warrior that's able to do your job for the society well, you'll have to have the virtue of courage. So merchants should have temperance, warriors should have courage. Now we get to the kings. The kings, according to Plato, should have the basic virtue of wisdom. So they got to be wise. So wisdom, what is wisdom? It's the ability to make good judgments based on the proper information. So So what I wrote is ability to make good decisions and weigh evidence. If people are going to be appointed to the highest position, to the leadership positions, then they are going to be making all the decisions about what kind of rules, policies, laws that we're going to live by. And we don't want people in that position of power and authority if they're not wise. You know, the biggest thing that could lead to the downfall of the republic is if you have imbecilic leadership making bad decisions that are ultimately going to be self-destructive to the well-functioning and health of the society overall. So in the end, what is Plato saying? He says that a best society is going to be one that divides the people into their proper place into the republic according to their abilities shown through these tests. And then when people are in those parts that they belong in, the parts of society should also exhibit the virtue that is distinctive of them. So when you have people all in their correct compartment, and the merchants show temperance, the warriors show courage, and the kings have wisdom, then that's a situation where you are living in a just and well-functioning society. Okay? So he says the best possible society, the best republic, the ideal utopian civilization is the one described here. Now, what would cause the society to fall apart is if the different aspects don't show the virtue that's distinctive of them. If the merchants do not have temperance, but instead are overly greedy. If the warriors do not have courage, but instead they're weak-willed and afraid. If the kings don't have wisdom, but instead are, stupid or whatever, idiotic, then that's not going to be a good society that a person would want to live in if they had their choice, ideally speaking. So that's what he thinks would be the best case scenario. The other thing that would undermine the health and well-functioning of the society is if the parts do not cooperate with each other. So he emphasizes that, and that's part of the reason this is called the harmony of the soul. The parts of the republic have to operate in harmonious cooperation. They should not be competing against each other or struggling for control. So for example, if the warriors wanted to overthrow the kings, like in a military coup, then that would be a poorly functioning society that's in disorder because the warriors don't have the virtue of wisdom to run the society, even if they could capture power. So when you have internal fighting and squabbling between the parts of the republic, then it's not working well. Basically, the lower parts, the merchants and the warriors, should both be willfully submitting, peacefully submitting to the right rule of these wise kings. And any attempt by the others to overthrow or to encroach on the power of the king is unjust, and it's to the harm of the republic. So the parts need to all be working harmoniously, cooperatively, according to their virtue, and in willful submission to the kings. Here I can read to you a little bit about it, and you can see how the author Plato says this. So he says on page 744, "We surely have not forgotten that the city was just because each of the three classes in it was doing its own work." And then Glaucon says, "I don't think we could forget that." So Socrates continues, "Then we must also remember that each one of us in whom each part is doing its own work will himself be just and do his own. Therefore, isn't it appropriate for the rational part to rule, since it really is wise and exercises foresight on behalf of the whole?" And then going down a little bit, he talks about the appetitive part. Before I do read the rest of the quote, though, I think I want to introduce the analogy that he's building up towards here. So now you've learned a little bit about the basic structure of Plato's Republic, how it's organized, what the parts of it are, what their virtue is supposed to be, and how they're supposed to work cooperatively in a harmony. Next thing that Plato talks about in this piece of writing is how the structure of the Republic can be modeled in the individual human soul. Okay, and that's where he gives us account of what he thinks the individual best life would be. So Plato and the Greeks believed in the soul, right? That we each have an immortal soul within us, kind of like how Descartes believes that also from dualism. But anyway, the Greeks believed in the soul, and Plato thought that there were three parts of the soul which were just parallel to the three parts of the Republic. So now we're going to switch this up and show how this kind of is parallel to his description of the three parts of the soul. Okay, so three main parts of the human soul now, according to the ancient Greeks. First of all, there is one part of us which he calls the appetitive part. Okay, so that's one part of your soul, and it's supposed to be comparable to the merchant class in the Republic. The appetitive part of your soul, as the word may indicate to you, has to do with your desires and appetites. It's the part of you that wants things that you don't yet have. So, So the appetitive part of you is the part of you that has appetites and desires that seeks fulfillment. So an appetite can be for almost anything, right? It could be literally for food, but it's not limited to that kind of example. You have an appetite for knowledge, for wealth. Right now you desire to graduate and get a degree from Chapman, and you don't have it yet. So there's a lot of things that you want. And the part of you inside that directs you towards those desired things, that says, go out, get those things, keep working for them, you want them, seek them out, that part of you is the appetitive part of your soul, okay? And he compares that to the merchant class. Now, I know it's not an exact comparison, but the basis of the comparison is that the merchants also want to make a profit. They desire wealth and money to increase their financial security, and so on. So the merchant class is kind of comparable to the appetite within you. Next up, another part of your soul, and again, remember, these are supposed to be kind of linked to the three parts of the Republic comparably. So another part of your soul is the spirited part. Okay, now the spirited part of your soul is what he compares with the warrior class of the Republic, because this is the part of you that basically has a lot of pride, that is competitive, that likes to win, that hates to lose, that likes to exhibit skill. So, the part of your soul that would be active if, let's say, you felt disrespected and you wanted to attack somebody, that would be the spirited part of you. Or if you're rooting on your favorite team or something in a game, in this case, you join with the spirited attitude that you want the team to win. Or if you yourself are an athlete or competitor in whatever type of field, the desire that you have to show your skill, showcase your ability, and do better than the next man or woman, that's the spirited part of you. Okay, it's the part of you that would stand up to defend yourself or other people if either they or values that you hold dear were threatened. And so that's just another fundamental part of you, and it's comparable to the warriors, of course, because they're tasked with the duty of the Republic to fight and defend it if it's threatened. So then last, you also got the rational part of your soul. And the rational part of you is comparable to the kings. That's the part of you that is wise, reflective, that makes good critical decisions. So okay, so you've got three parts of you inside, according to this argument, just like the ideal society has three parts too. And if you want your life to go as well as possible, he says that you should try to get, first of all, the three parts within you, the three parts of the soul, to exhibit the virtue that is unique to them. And the virtue of each of these three parts of the soul is exactly the same virtue I mentioned before in relation to the three parts of the Republic. So that means that what's the virtue of the appetitive part then, if you can follow my discussion? The virtue of the appetitive part will be the same as the corresponding virtue in the part of the soul that the appetitive part compares with. So for your appetites, yes, temperance would be the virtue, correct, Eva? And that means that you should have appetites and desires that you want to fulfill, that you do fulfill. But you should also balance that with some self-control and moderation. Otherwise, your desires and appetites will run your life and make it so that your life can no longer be rationally organized. A person who pursues their appetites to all ends with no exceptions, with no limitations, is sometimes like a thrill-seeking type of person, or an adventurous sort of person. It's not always a bad thing, but in some cases it can lead you into corruption, criminality, or dishonesty, right? If you want something so bad that you would lie, harm people, undermine institutions to get it, then that's your appetitive part becoming overactive, and temperance needs to balance it. So temperance is the virtue of the appetite. The spirited part of you that wants to compete, win, and show pride and all of that, that should also have the virtue of courage or bravery. Because if you're ever in need of acting in a way that requires defense or the exhibition of skill, then you'll have to have the bravery associated with being willing to do it, even if it's uncomfortable or even dangerous in some cases. And then the rational part of you should have wisdom, because it's the part that makes all the decisions, and it's the one that's supposed to be running everything. So if you have a sort of executive component within you that's not acting off of, desires, and it's not acting off of emotions or passions, but just, hard evidence and good judgment, then that part should be wise. If the rational part of you that makes all these careful decisions is somehow not graced by wisdom or intelligence, then it's going to lead you into a series of harmful, self-destructive, and poorly considered decisions. Just like a society run by ineffective leadership at the top would do the same. So now we're learning a little bit about how the ideal human soul should be. And one more point, the harmony is important as well. The three parts of the soul, he claims, should work harmoniously together, not fighting with each other. So that means that which part should rule? You should let the reason and rational part within you rule. And that should oversee and manage the lower parts of the soul. The lower parts of the soul should not try to overthrow or take leadership away from the rational part. If they do, that's when you start to behave badly in a way that's unjust and that doesn't tend to your best interest or advantage. Say, for example, that someone cut you off driving and you got into a blind rage, and road rage takes over, and you follow this person to wherever they park, and then you beat them silly once they get out of the car. Now, that's not a good thing that you should do. That would not be wise. But if you did do it, which part of the soul would be stepping outside of its lane and taking over the position of leading everything? If you got into some type of poorly considered physical confrontation based on rage, then which part of the soul has become too powerful right there and has stepped outside of its lane to become the leader, and it's not supposed to? The spirited part, that's right, Jason. Your pride, your sense of dignity has been so upset by this momentary slight on the roadway that you've now taken an action that's definitely against your better judgment. And if you had simply allowed your reason to rule, it would have told you that this is not the best choice. How about another case? Say that there's something that you want and you could save for it patiently, but the desire that you have for it is so strong that it compels you to commit theft and you actually steal something. Now you've got the item, but you are a thief, and maybe you're going to indulge in this pattern of theft and bad behavior more, which ultimately is not going to be to your best advantage. Well, the thief is allowing what part of their soul to become too powerful? What do you think on that one? I gave you the case of the road rage. Now I'm going into the case of the thief. That's right, that's the appetitive part. So you should have appetites, but they shouldn't be so strong that they override your better judgment, which would tell you that if, although you want it and you should be able to get it, you're going to have to attain it through some kind of legal means, right? So the best life that you can live then is one where you appoint each of the parts of your soul to their proper role, but not doing the role or job of any of the other parts. So The spirited part should not try to overthrow reason and act as the leader, nor should the appetites. They should each do their own job, stay in their own lane, as it were, doing their own task according to their virtue, and all under the right leadership and willful, peaceful submission to the reason within you. So now I can finish reading this quote, which now I believe will have a little more context. So it says here, so isn't it appropriate for the rational part to rule, since it is really wise, and exercises foresight on behalf of the whole soul, and for the spirited part to obey it and be its ally? And he says, and these two, having been nurtured in this way, and having truly learned their own roles and been educated in them, will govern the appetitive part, which is the largest part in each person's soul and is by nature most insatiable for money. They'll watch over it to see that it is not filled with the so-called pleasures of the body, and that it does not become so big and strong that it no longer does its own work, but attempts to enslave and rule over the classes that it's not fit to rule, thereby overturning everyone's whole life. And he says, then wouldn't these two parts, the reason and the spirited part, do the finest, the reason and appetitive part, do the finest job of guarding the whole soul and body against external enemies, reason by planning, spirit by fighting. So I don't know why I can't talk right now. The rational part and the spirited part jointly cooperate to protect the republic, or the soul as it were, against threats. So reason plans and spirit fights, following the leadership and decisions of reason and carrying them out through courage. And it is because of the spirited part that we call an individual courageous, namely when it preserves through pain and pleasure the declarations of reason. And we will call him wise because of that small part of himself that rules in him and makes those declarations and has within it the knowledge of what is advantageous for each part and for the whole soul, which is the community of all three parts. And continuing down, he says, well, he talks about the cases I kind of mentioned. What if someone committed fraud or theft or embezzlement? He says that would be a person that does not have the proper balance in the parts of their soul. He says, if we had come to an agreement about whether someone similar in nature and training to our city had embezzled a deposit of gold or silver that he had accepted, who do you think would consider him to have done it rather than someone else? And Glaucon says no one would think that he had done it, the person who had this harmony and balance of the parts of their soul. Socrates continues, and would he have anything to do with temple robberies, thefts, betrayals of friends in private life, or cities in public life? And he says, no, he would not. And he would be in no way untrustworthy in keeping an oath or an agreement. No, how could he? Adultery, disrespect for parents, neglect of the gods, all those would be more in keeping with another kind of character except from him. And he says, with everyone. So, and the cause of all this is that every part is within him does its own work, whether it's ruling or being ruled. So he says, the dream we had has been completely fulfilled. Our suspicion that with the help of God, we hit upon the origin and pattern of justice in the foundation of our city and also in the human soul. Now, there's still this question that remains that Socrates still has to quickly discuss at the end here. And it's an interesting conversation they have now about, well, what if you could be unjust but never be caught? Would that be to your advantage? Would you benefit, basically? Here's the question. Could you benefit from unjust behavior as long as nobody knew about it? And I mean, do you understand that question? Think about that. The question is sort of like, what if you could get away with doing anything, basically, even if it was wrong or against the law? If you had a 100% guarantee that you would never get caught, would it be to your advantage to do those things? Like, I don't know, cheat on all your exams, you know, I don't know, commit all kinds of other financial crimes, steal things, and just no one would ever know about it. If that was possible, would that be to your advantage? Would that benefit you? And I mean, I would ask you if we had plenty of time left, and then I would see what you thought. Normally when I ask this question to a student group, you know, there will be a person that will venture to say, oh yeah, it would benefit me. And I can understand why you might think so, because you could think that the penalty you receive is the only real harm that comes from unjust behavior. So like if you steal from someone, what you're worried about is someone knowing about it and then you getting held accountable. But if the accountability cannot happen, then you may suppose, well, sure, it could be to my benefit. Now I've got the option. Now I've got the item that I didn't have before the theft. There's a myth actually in ancient Greece that Socrates and Plato sometimes talk about in connection with this idea, and it's called the Ring of Gyges. Okay, now I couldn't give you all the details, but basically the idea of the ring was it's a mythical ring, and the legend had it that if you could put it on, it would cloak you in invisibility. And once you're wearing this ring, becoming invisible, obviously that would open up all kinds of opportunities to do all sorts of, crimes in which you can never be caught for, right? You could gain access to places where you're not allowed to be. You could eavesdrop on conversation to get information that you're not privy to. You could steal things, obviously, and no one could find the thief because you'd be invisible while doing it. So, you'd have all kinds of chances to do bad things that never would be found out. Would that be to your advantage? Now, one way of looking at it, a straightforward answer might be sure. But perhaps you're not surprised to hear that for Plato and Socrates' point of view, the answer is actually no. You don't benefit. Even if nobody knows about it, even if nobody in the whole world ever finds out, you're still going to be harmed, and you're going to be at a loss from unjust behavior, even if and when it does not get discovered by anybody. So why then is that true, or why does he think that's true? Well, that's where I guess we'll have to pick up on the beginning of Wednesday. There's a little metaphor that he gives to explain his point here, which is a metaphor of like a three-headed creature, and that takes just a few minutes of explanation. So maybe we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning on Wednesday completing the last note on this work from Socrates and Plato, and then we will just transition from there into the next author on the same topic, which is Jean-Paul Sartre. So I'd like you to try and read through the Jean-Paul Sartre if you have not done it, and of course the Plato as well if you haven't done that. And then we'll be all up to speed, ready to talk about the information on Wednesday. Sartre's view about what makes a good human life is radically different from Plato, because Plato says we should all basically try to achieve this harmony and balance among the parts of the soul. So it's kind of like a one-size-fits-all approach. But for Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher of the 1900s, the 20th century, he thinks that it's much more individualistic, that each individual basically creates their own picture of what they think the best human life is, and there's no single paradigm that we should all be seeking out because there's no objective fact as to which one's better or worse. That's a different view. Plato has a much more, I guess you could say, essentialist view. Like we're all essentially the same in a way. We all have the same kind of soul structure, so there's a certain kind of standard that we should all be aspiring toward. So it's a little different, and you're just going to learn about the various arguments and views that are out there. So, okay, guys, is everything good? Hopefully you had a great break and some nice time off. I'm hoping that everyone stayed healthy and safe. I know there's a lot of cases of the coronavirus that are spreading, but, we'll get through this in the end. Just hang in there. So, all right, guys, I'm going to let you go then. Let me know in the chat here if everything's fine. Thanks again, Eva and everybody else. I'll see you back on Wednesday, and let me know if you need anything through email. Okay, then. Bye-bye.